So I'm going to look at Numbers chapter 13 and chapter 14. So the last time I shared in a service, I shared Numbers chapter 12, but I only did in one service. But this evening I'll do chapter 13, 14, but I'm going to show you God's kingdom attitude. Now, it is the story of the 12 spies. Now, after a long series of preparations and several grumbling and rebellion incidents, the Israelites finally arrived at the southern edge of the promised land. That means they are right now at the doorstep of Canaan, all ready to enter into the promised land. Now, this is Numbers chapter 13. They are already at the border of the promised land. So let's look at verse 1 and verse 2, Numbers 13. It says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them." So Moses chose 12 leaders and sent these 12 spies to check out the land of Canaan. Now the spies' their job were to survey the land, to deduce the military might of the inhabitants, and also to survey the quality of the land. Now they spent about 40 days, the Bible says. 40 days they explored the land and returned with reports on what they saw. Now their initial reports have some good news and some bad news. Now the good news was that God's promise is true. The land was indeed very fruitful. Look at verse 27. They told Moses and said, "We went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit." So they even brought back fruit from the land as evidence to convince Moses of what great promise that God has given to us. So there was the good news, but then there was the bad news. Now the bad news was that the residents of the land are strong, and they live in large fortified cities. Look at the next verse, verse 28. It says, "Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak. There the Amalekites dwelt in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwelt in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwelt by the sea along the banks of the Jordan." So you find that they gave Moses a very detailed list of all the enemies that they saw. Bad news, they are strong and they live in fortified cities. Now everything that the spies reported are factual. And up to this point in their report, the spies had accurately described what they had seen. So the fact is, there are good news. Everybody say good news. And bad news. Everybody say bad news. And you know what, church? What Israel faced is also the reality of our life and ministry. This is the reality of life. Promise always comes with problems. Promise always comes with problems. You see, our calling in God will always come with challenges. Dreams and visions will have their obstacles and enemies. Life and ministry is never a bed of roses. This is the reality of life. There will be good news and bad news. You see, sometimes I hear people say, "You know what, when you believe in Jesus, everything is going to be smooth sailing. Good news all the way." But on the contrary, I find that very often when I choose to obey God, all hell breaks loose. All kinds of trouble suddenly seems to appear to want to stop you from entering the promise that God has given you. But remember what Jesus told us in John 16 verse 33. Jesus already said that in the world you will have tribulation. But be of good cheer, because I have overcome the world. God's word. Everybody say God's word. This is God's word. Why is this so important? Because sometimes we human beings, we live as if the earth is our world and heaven or eternity is God's world. One more time, let me tell you. Men often think that the earth is our world and heaven is God's world. But my question is, who created this earth? God. This is God's word. In Psalms 24 verse 1, it says, the earth is the Lord's and all its fullness, the world and those who dwell therein. The earth is still God's word. Why is this so important for you to understand? Because in God's word, you have to ask yourself a question: how does God work? In His word and His promises must ultimately prevail. Because God works by His word. God works by a promise. In Genesis chapter 1, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. There were the descendants of Anak, Amalekites, Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, and the Canaanites. That is my version, right? I can even add, the earth was without form and void, darkness was on the face of the deep. The debtors, the bills that you got to pay, the bankruptcy, the sickness, the cancer, the heart disease, the skin disease. Darkness was on the face of the deep. This is reality. But you know what? This is God's word. And how did God work? Look at the next sentence. And the Spirit of the Lord was hovering on the face of the waters. Do not fear, because the Lord is with us. This is still His word, His kingdom. And He is still with us. But then, what happened next? Did God send His angels to create, to restore the chaos? Did the angels come in with a big flashlight to shine into the darkness of the deep? Did God unleash His heavenly machineries to recreate the earth? No. How did God create? Verse 3 says, then God said, let there be light, and there was light. God works by a promise. He works by His word. And when He said, let there be light, His word became flesh and lived among us. He spoke a promise, and the promise became reality. That is the way God works. And this is God's word, God's kingdom. And the way He works is by His word and by His promise. Psalms 33 verse 9 says, for He spoke and it was done. He commanded and it stood fast. His promises will come to pass. His promises will eventually prevail. Don't give up on His promises, City Harvest. Don't give up on God Himself. Because in His word, Jesus said, blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. We have not dared, but we believe His promise is true. Because in His word, we walk by faith and not by sight. In spite of all our circumstances, let our eyes be on His promise. We are still marching towards the promised land. The land that God has given to us in God's word. His word and His promises must ultimately prevail. So our job is to keep believing, keep speaking, keep praying, keep doing His promise and His word. Let's go back to Numbers 14. In verse 11, it says, then the Lord said to Moses, how long will these people reject me? How long will they not believe me? And all the signs which I perform among them? Friends, you know what? Unbelief is not just rejecting the works of God or the promises of God, but it's rejecting God himself. Notice God says, how long will these people reject me? Because his promise and his word and him is synonymous. And because they rejected God, judgment came upon them. If you look further down, Numbers 14:37, it says, those very men who brought the evil report about the land died in the plague before the Lord. Judgment came. And these people who embraced a negative report died. We may even think, when you read this, you may think that the people would have learned the lesson to fear the Lord and to follow him. But lo and behold, look at verse 40. I like to use the word alas or ado, right? Verse 40, it says, and they rose early in the morning and went up to the top of the mountain, saying, here we are, and we will go up to the place which the Lord has promised, for we have sinned. You know what? The Israelites, because seeing the judgment came, seeing that they have done wrong, suddenly they changed their minds. They decided to rise up and fight the inhabitants of Canaan. But you know what? Their attitude was wrong. You see, they were coming with an attitude and say, oh, Moses, what? Such serious matter, huh? If you want us to go, we go lah. Okay lah, we go lah. You happy now? We go with you lah. That is the kind of attitude they have. But Moses warned them and said, guys, it is not about just the promise and then just entering in. Your heart, the attitude, important. He warned them. Look at verse 41. He says, but Moses said, why are you disobeying the Lord's command? This will not succeed. Do not go up, because the Lord is not with you. Because during that time, when they go to war, the ark of the covenant must travel with them. But the ark was not moving. Remember? They followed the cloud. When the cloud lifted and moved, they follow. If the cloud don't move, they don't move. But the cloud was not moving. And the people say, we will go. You know what? It is not by human strength. It is not by human resolve or determination. We are not talking about having faith in faith or believe in the power of believing. I'm not talking about psyching yourself up. I can do it, I can do it, I can do it. It's not about psyching yourself up to try to make yourself feel confident and ready to do something difficult. When the people did that, they eventually failed and was utterly defeated. You know what the key is? The presence of God in the midst of them. Everybody say the presence of God. It is about a relationship with God. Because his promise is his person. And his person is his promise. His word is his person. And his person is his word. In the beginning was the word, and the word became flesh and lived. It's not a dead word, it's a living word. You follow him, walk with him every single day of your life. It is not mechanically reciting the promise. It is encountering the person.